Does Kris know the prophecy of Deltarune? This is a question that I've thought about for quite some time, but never had the insights needed in order to expand on it. That was until we got Chapter 4, where I've noticed something that I found quite interesting. And it is during the large piano puzzle scene in the latter half of the Dark Sanctuary world. Leading up to this scene, there's Susie who finds a massive piano code on the wall that is for the large piano puzzle in the previous room, where we have to transcribe the entire thing and be able to play it on the piano in order to continue our journey. And normally, we would try to read off the code that we see and play it on a smaller piano, except this one's a little larger, having a whopping 18 different notes that can be played, as opposed to the usual 4. However, and no matter what we do, even if we play the code correctly, we always seem to get it wrong. Which is where Kris steps in and uses their expert piano skills in order to play the song for us and complete the puzzle. After almost 50 seconds of playing, good gracious, the puzzle is solved and we can continue on with our journey. Though, something interesting that I've noticed is that it is possible to hear the song being played by Kris early. As in, back near the beginning of the chapter in Noelle's house. During the part of the adventure where we're separated from Kris, we are actually given a chance to hear them play on the piano at Noelle's house. There's over 8 minutes of music being played here, and they're mainly piano arrangements of some other songs that we've heard on our journey. Of which, we got Quiz, which is supposed to be Query, but Query at the time being is unused, though it is still pretty close. I believe it originally was supposed to be used, and is actually in the soundtrack of Deltarune, so it's technically an official song. It's just unused. There's Lancer Waltz, which is pretty much Lancer's theme, although when I first heard this is more of a personal thing, I completely thought it was based on the Amori duet song. But I think that might just be because they're both waltzes. That's probably just me, though. I've literally heard nobody else compare the two like that. I don't know if I'm crazy or not, or I'm just brain rotted. I don't know. Kris also plays Rules Cards theme as well. And the last of the songs that we do know is for the Last Prophecy, which is based on the legend prophecy that Rouse gives us at the beginning of Chapter 1, and this is just the background music. But those 4 songs are the ones that we do know the source of. There are actually some other originals that Kris plays here that don't have a source, or, well, at the very least, to haven't been played in the game yet. They might in future chapters, though. There's 7-4. Waiting Room. Shop. which we might potentially know what it's used in because in one of the recent Deltarune newsletters, there's a song called Shop 3 that's being played, which, in my opinion, sounds similar. Again, that might just be me, though. But of course, last but not least, is prophecy. Which, upon closer inspection, is actually just a faster and higher-pitched version of A Conundrum's Multitude Tones, which is the song that we play on the large piano in Chapter 4. Here's a quick comparison. Now, the question that I want to ask is, how does Kris already know the exact song that's the answer to the large piano puzzle before we even saw it? Which would have to mean that Kris has seen this piano puzzle code before, or at least, like, on some sheet music somewhere. And so leads to my initial question of, does Kris know the prophecy? Well, okay, for starters, how do we know for sure that this massive wall of notes is even part of the prophecy in the first place? I mean, it just seems kind of odd to have so many notes for like a prophecy section. How do we know for sure that this is actually part of the prophecy? Well, the visual effects of the wall of notes is fairly similar to the other prophecy images, but is there any other evidence than that? Well, lucky for us, there actually is. While in the Dark Sanctuary, you'll eventually come across this one piano puzzle that requires 2 separate codes to open the gate, where you have to go 2 separate ways in order to actually get both codes and pass the puzzle. There are actually 3 different outcomes to this puzzle specifically, depending on how many of the codes that you have. Each outcome resulting in Ralse and Susie saying different things. Here's what they say when you find both codes. Nice, Kris. All you had to do is follow the prophecy thing. If it's that easy, maybe we should just do whatever it says. How about it, Ralse? Want to memorize it for us?
That's okay, Susie. I already know it.
Oh, okay, sweet. However, if you only find one of the codes and are still able to complete the puzzle, Ralse says this.
Amazing, Kris! You solved it without the second hint. You must really be an expert on the prophecy.
Susie doesn't have any follow-up lines here. And of course there's the last one where you find none of the codes.
Amazing, Kris! You already knew the answer. You must really know a lot of things, don't you?
All the outcomes of this conversation seem to imply that even these little piano puzzles here are also part of the prophecy. However, something to note is that during these scenes, when we're playing these piano puzzles, is that it's not Kris putting in these puzzle codes. It's us, the player. Because, at least for this one puzzle right here where we need the 2 codes in order to pass, it does make sense for us to know it, because we could easily just write it down on a piece of paper. I mean, look at this piece of paper right here. This is the exact code that I use in order to not have to do these puzzles in the future. You know, sequence breaking and stuff. So, at least in these instances, it's not Kris solving the puzzles, but us. However, during the large piano scene, we are not the ones that are actually able to finish the puzzle. Either for it being too complex for us, or just for whatever reason we're not able to complete it. Where afterwards, Ralse chimes in saying that he could complete the puzzle for the group. However, Susie then butts in and insists that Kris play the piano anyway because of their expert piano skills. Of which she has questioned for quite some time because she hasn't actually seen Kris play piano yet. Which actually makes sense because Susie only met Kris while we, the player, were in control of Kris, and they just weren't able to play the piano afterwards. Which, geez, that's gotta suck for them. Imagine being super good at something, and then all of a sudden you get possessed by a guy that knows nothing about what you do for a living. Or, like, your hobby. Anyways, Kris ends up deciding to listen to Susie and plays the entire piece in one go without any errors. And after finishing the puzzle, we gain back control, and plink! Our hands then hit the piano to signal our regaining control of Kris. Now, a bit of an analysis here. How do we actually know that Kris knows the song before it's being played here? As in, like, knowing it from the prophecy? Well, at least during this scene it's difficult to tell, because it could be possible that Kris is just using the sheet music provided by Susie and reading along with it and playing the entire song while just reading the sheet music. Of course, that's not explicitly shown, so we can't really, like, rule that out or even put it in as consideration. And I mean, Kris is really good at piano. They probably just recognized what the notes were and just knew how to do the entire puzzle by only looking at it once, because Kris is just that good at piano. However, this doesn't exactly explain why Kris is able to play the exact song on Noelle's piano back at her home. And even though they're like very slightly different from each other, they're more or less basically the same song. So, piecing all that together, with the conundrum's multitude being a part of the prophecy, and Kris seemingly being able to know the song before being introduced to it properly in Chapter 4, does this mean that Kris knows the entire prophecy? Well, I mean, at least they could have memorized just that one part. Which actually would be in character for Kris, because in the past they did attend church when Azrael was there some years ago. Who's to say that Kris didn't get introduced to the song sometime during that time in church, and just liked it enough and memorized it enough to play without error in the future, being perhaps their favorite song? That being said, if Kris does in fact know the prophecy, then it also means that they're aware of any major or minor events that'll be happening in the coming chapters. Like they would have known of Tenna's fate, being cleaved by the night. They would have known of our encounter with Gerson and the weapon that he would grant us. And Kris would even know the prophecy's conclusion, the one where we never actually got to be able to see the full picture, because Susie smashed it to bits before we could see it. Thanks, Susie. You know, if we take this to the logical extreme, and Kris does in fact know the prophecy, that would mean that both Kris and Rouse know the prophecy, which also means that poor Susie is being very left in the dark, being the only one in the group that doesn't know what's going to happen next. I can only imagine this tension building in the coming chapters as like, what do you mean you know the prophecy more than any of us? That's ridiculous. Why am I the only one that knows nothing, says Susie. Last thing, if Kris does know the prophecy, then it actually does make it very easy for them to stay on script, so to say. Because we as the player don't actually have as much control as we think we do, mostly because I believe Kris actually prevents us from gaining full access to whatever choices that we can make. And, well, Kris knowing the prophecy can actually help them prevent us from finding things out when we really shouldn't. Or also ensuring that we're on the right path, and then keeping us on the right path. So that's what I think Kris could be using the knowledge of the prophecy for, just keeping us on track to be able to play the entire game as we should. Though that doesn't explain why we're able to somewhat go off track, or why they're perfectly fine with the weird route. Okay, actually, there's one thing that I just remembered. There is this one prophecy here that currently is unused, and says, "Cold water fell from the top of the sky." So far, the only time that this actually fits any description is whenever Noelle is using Snowgrave. At the moment, we haven't encountered anything similar. The assumption being that this is somewhat of a prophecy bit about the weird route. Though, like I said, it's hard to say if this is actually part of the prophecy because it is currently unused. Though, that being said, if the piano images within Chapter 4 were in some ways part of the prophecy, who's to say that we have seen all of the prophecy? How do we know for certain that there aren't any more images that we haven't seen yet? One of them being the cold water fell from the sky prophecy. if it is actually part of the prophecy, that could also explain why Kris is somewhat okay with us going down the weird route, at least for a little bit. Of course, later on, they didn't like what happened. But if Kris does know the prophecy and wants to keep us on script for as long as possible, but then accidentally lets us down the weird route thinking that it was part of the prophecy, which allows us to even do the weird route at all. These are all questions that unfortunately probably need to remain questions until later chapters come out. You know, in a couple months or so. And I think that is actually going to be the end of this video. I've been working on a much longer theory video project that is basically me revisiting the old second voice theory from like eons ago. I ended up like, I'm gonna say over-analyzing it, like to an absurd degree, which made it go for like an hour and 30 minutes. I'm desperately trying to reduce the runtime on that thing. Anyways, that video probably won't be done until like February. Thought I could get it done this month. No. But the more I got into that theory video, the more ideas that I had for like other smaller videos that I could make. So I've thought about making shorter ones like the video that you're watching right now. That, fun fact, actually took me a whole week to make, as opposed to the second voice theory video. That's taken me 3 or 4 months, because I had to revise the whole thing 5 times or so. But to make up for it, I wanted to make some shorter ones, so that I could more feasibly get these out in a more reasonable time. Comment below what you think about them, or if you think there's any other ideas or theories that I should go down, any avenues of discussion to check out. And, well, if I'm interested enough in it, I might make a video on it. But anyways, I've been Deanspillabean, back on your screen, and I hope you all enjoyed it at least some amount. And you all have a good night. Goodbye, everybody.